I was surrounded by laughter, music, and the sound of clinking glasses. The room glowed with candles, balloons floated in the corners, and the smell of fresh cake filled the air. It was my birthday, a milestone, and my children had planned a big celebration. Friends, neighbors, relatives. Everyone was there, smiling, toasting, hugging me like I was the most loved woman in the world. And I believed it. At least for a while. I'm a mother, and I'm a grandmother. I've lived through love, loss, sacrifice, and struggle, and on that night, I told myself I was lucky to have a family that cared enough to gather for me. I looked around at my children, so attentive, so unusually sweet, and I thought maybe they finally appreciated me. Maybe this was their way of saying thank you. But beneath those warm smiles, something darker was waiting. It came quietly, so quietly I almost didn't catch it. My granddaughter, just 8 years old, tugged at my sleeve. Her little eyes were wide, her voice barely a whisper. She leaned close and said words that froze me in place. "Grandma, my parents will take your money after the party today." I smiled, I nodded, and I kept the mask on my face. But in that moment, my world shifted. The betrayal I never wanted to believe was real, and what I chose to do next would shock every single person in that room. The night began with music, laughter, and the kind of joy that only a family gathering can bring. My home was glowing with soft golden lights strung across the ceiling, casting a warm, inviting glow over every corner of the room. Balloons bobbed gently near the fireplace, ribbons curled down the sides of chairs, and the dining table was dressed with my best linens, snowy white with a centerpiece of roses my neighbor had dropped off earlier that afternoon. Guests began arriving one by one, their coats dusted with the chill of the evening air. I greeted them at the door with hugs and smiles, taking in their warmth, their cheer. My closest friends came with wrapped boxes and bottles of wine, each of them kissing me on the cheek, telling me how radiant I looked. My sisters, always the life of the party, came in laughing so loudly you could hear them from down the street. My cousins, my neighbors, and even old church friends, all of them poured into my home with smiles wide, their voices rising in a harmony of chatter and celebration. The air was alive with the smell of roasted chicken, buttery rolls, and the rich sweetness of a chocolate cake cooling in the kitchen. The music, a playlist my son had insisted on making, flowed softly in the background. Old songs I used to sing while cooking, songs that carried me back to when the kids were little. Glasses clinked, laughter bubbled, and for a moment everything felt just as it should be. But then, there was my family. My children, grown and busy with lives of their own, had been strangely attentive all night. My daughter hovered close, complimenting me over and over again. "Mom, you look so beautiful tonight," she said more than once. "That dress is perfect on you. You don't look your age at all." Her smile was wide, almost too wide, and her voice carried a sugar-sweet tone that I hadn't heard since she was a teenager trying to talk her way out of trouble. My son, usually quiet and distant, suddenly couldn't leave my side. He made sure my glass was always full, pulled out my chair, and even laughed at jokes I barely finished. "Mom, you're incredible," he said at one point, clapping me on the shoulder like I was his guest of honor. "We don't know what we'd do without you." His words were charming, but his eyes kept darting toward my purse, sitting near the sofa. The attention felt good, of course. What mother doesn't enjoy hearing her children praise her? But deep down there was a stirring inside me, a small, persistent voice whispering that something wasn't right. Their kindness didn't feel like love. It felt like performance. Still, I brushed it aside. It was my birthday, after all. A day to celebrate, not to second-guess every smile. As the evening went on, the party swelled with life. Guests filled their plates from the buffet, roast beef carved fresh, mashed potatoes steaming, casseroles sent over by neighbors, a spread of cheeses and breads that could have fed an army. I watched them laugh and eat, my heart swelling with pride at the home I had built. the life I had nurtured. And my children, oh, how they carried themselves. They moved like perfect hosts, refilling drinks, passing plates, offering slices of cake before anyone had to ask. My daughter-in-law even took my arm and whispered, "You raised the most wonderful son. He's just like you." But her grip on my arm lingered, tight and almost rehearsed, like the words she spoke were lines she'd memorized. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being unfair. Maybe they were simply trying to make me feel special, to honor me the way I deserved. For years, I had carried this family through storms, through heartbreak, through every struggle life threw our way. Maybe this was their way of finally saying thank you. So I smiled. I laughed. I accepted every compliment with a nod and a touch to my chest. I let myself believe for just a moment that maybe, just maybe, my children had changed. But then, in the middle of the chatter, I felt a small tug at the hem of my dress. I looked down and there she was, my granddaughter, just 8 years old with her hair pulled back in a crooked braid and her eyes wide as saucers. She tugged again, more urgently this time, her little face tilted up toward mine. I leaned down to her level, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice soft, almost lost in the roar of the room. She looked around nervously, making sure no one else could hear. Then she leaned in close, her tiny lips brushing against my ear. And in the smallest, most fragile whisper, she said the words that froze my blood. "Grandma, my parents will take your money after the party today." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Her words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I pulled back just enough to see her face, to search her eyes for any hint of mischief. But she wasn't joking. She wasn't playing. She was terrified. I felt the room spin around me. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar, like I was suddenly underwater. My children's faces flashed in front of me, those forced smiles, those flattering words, the way they hovered too close. And I knew my granddaughter wasn't lying. The instincts I had tried to push away all evening came flooding back, sharp and undeniable. The sweetness, the kindness, the sudden attentiveness, it wasn't love. It was greed. I didn't let my shock show. Instead, I smiled down at her, squeezed her little hand, and whispered back, "Thank you, my darling." Then I stood tall, my mask fixed firmly on my face. I laughed at a joke someone told. I raised my glass in a toast. I hugged my children as though nothing at all had changed. But inside, everything had. That one whisper, that one moment, turned the entire night on its head. The celebration was no longer a party. It was a performance, a charade, and I, for the first time that evening, realized I was the only one who knew the truth. And as I looked around the room, at the faces of the very people who shared my blood, I made a silent promise to myself. If they thought they could outsmart me, if they thought they could betray me in my own home, on my own birthday, then they were about to learn just how wrong they were. But I stayed quiet. I smiled. I let the night carry on, every detail burning into my memory. The decorations, the food, the laughter, it all played out like a scene in a play. And me? I was the actress, smiling sweetly, even as the storm inside me began to rise. Because thanks to my granddaughter's whisper, I knew what was coming. And I was already preparing for what I would do next. Her little hand was still wrapped around my sleeve when the words slipped into my ear like a knife cutting through silk. "Grandma, my parents will take your money after the party today." 8 words. Just 8 words from the mouth of a child, my granddaughter with her crooked braid and trembling voice, that shattered everything I thought I knew about my own family. I froze in place, staring at her face. Her eyes, those wide, innocent eyes, were not mischievous, not playful. They were scared, terrified even. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't repeating some silly playground gossip. She was warning me. For a moment, the room spun around me. I heard the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of dresses and suits moving from one end of the room to the other, but all of it sounded distant, muffled, like I was underwater. All I could focus on were those words. Take my money, my own children, my flesh and blood, my son, my daughter, the two people I had carried in my arms as infants, the two people whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose fevers I had stayed up all night nursing, whose futures I had sacrificed so much to protect. And yet here I was, standing at my own birthday party, with my granddaughter whispering that those very children were planning to strip me of everything I had worked for. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind in a single heartbeat. Could it be true? Had I missed the signs? Why would they do this to me? And then, like a floodgate bursting open, the memories of the evening came rushing back. Every compliment, every fake smile, every overly sweet gesture that had seemed just a little too polished. My daughter's words. Mom, you look so beautiful tonight. You don't look your age at all. My son's sudden attentiveness, making sure my glass was never empty, hovering near me like a bodyguard. My daughter-in-law's tight grip on my arm as she whispered words of praise, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It all replayed in my mind, and for the first time I saw it clearly. They weren't celebrating me. They were circling me. Waiting. I swallowed hard, but I didn't let my face show what I had just heard. That was the first decision I made that night. I would not let them know I knew. I smiled at my granddaughter, brushing a strand of hair back from her face, my voice steady as I whispered back, "Thank you, sweetheart. Don't worry. Grandma's okay." She looked up at me with a mixture of relief and fear, her little eyes searching mine as if to make sure I believed her. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze, the kind of squeeze that said, "I understand. I'll take it from here." And then I stood up tall, turned back toward the room and slipped my mask back on. I laughed at a joke one of my cousins told. I clinked my glass against a neighbor's in a cheerful toast. I even hugged my daughter when she came over to gush about how perfect the evening was. But inside, I was burning. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drum, each beat echoing with betrayal. How could my children, my own children, plan something like this? As I stood there, watching them move around the room, I began to notice things I had brushed aside before. The way my son's eyes lingered on my purse whenever I set it down. The way my daughter kept glancing toward the study, where I kept important papers locked in a desk drawer. The way they exchanged quick, loaded glances when they thought no one was watching. It was all there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I began to study them quietly, the way a hawk circles overhead, patient and silent. Every gesture, every smile, every movement seemed to carry a hidden meaning. My son laughed loudly with a group of guests, but his hand tightened around his drink as though he were trying to keep his nerves at bay. My daughter's laughter rang out a little too sharp, her compliments delivered a little too often, as if she were trying to drown out her own guilty conscience. Even my daughter-in-law, usually aloof, was suddenly warm and attentive. She flitted around me like a shadow, always near enough to keep an eye on me. At one point she leaned close, brushing crumbs off my sleeve and whispering, "You're the heart of this family, you know that, right?" I smiled, nodded, and thanked her, but in my mind I thought, "You're lying." And I know it now. It was astonishing really how quickly everything had shifted. Just an hour earlier, I had been telling myself I was lucky. Lucky to have children who cared enough to plan a party, who cared enough to shower me with love and attention. But now, every gesture felt poisoned. Every word felt rehearsed. And every smile looked more like a mask. I felt a pang of grief deep in my chest. Not for my money, not for my possessions, but for the love I thought was genuine. For the family I thought I had. Still, I knew better than to let that grief show. If they suspected I was onto them, they might act sooner, more recklessly. No, the best thing I could do was play along, pretend I believed their act, pretend I didn't hear the whisper that had already changed everything. So I laughed. I toasted. I danced with my granddaughter, twirling her around the room while my children watched with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. I played the part of the happy mother, the grateful grandmother, the unsuspecting woman who had no idea what was coming. But I did know. And as I watched them, as I pieced together the subtle signs, the greedy glances, the tightened grips, the forced laughter, I realized something else. This wasn't the first time. I thought back to the weeks before the party, to the phone calls that came out of nowhere. My son, usually too busy to talk, suddenly checking in to see how I was feeling. My daughter dropping by with groceries, insisting I let her put them away herself. My daughter-in-law asking oddly specific questions about my savings, my bills, my will. At the time, I had brushed it off as thoughtfulness, as kindness. But now I saw it for what it was. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. And that realization hurt more than anything else, because it meant this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. It wasn't desperation or a mistake. It was calculated, intentional. My children, the ones I had raised and loved, had been scheming against me all along. I felt anger rising inside me, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down. There would be a time for anger, a time for truth, a time for action. But not yet. For now, I would stay calm. I would observe. I would gather every piece of evidence my heart needed to accept the reality I had been blind to for far too long. So I kept my mask firmly in place, smiling, laughing, playing the part of the oblivious mother. All the while, my eyes never left them. And the more I watched, the clearer it became. They weren't celebrating me. They were circling me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And thanks to my granddaughter's whisper, I knew exactly what they were planning. What they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that I was no longer the prey. I was already becoming the hunter. The laughter still rang through the house when I made my decision. I stood there, a smile painted across my lips, nodding at conversations I wasn't hearing, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, clinking glasses I didn't even want to hold. But behind my mask, my mind was racing. My granddaughter's whisper echoed over and over again. "Grandma, my parents will take your money after the party today." I replayed those words with every passing second. They weren't just words. They were a warning, a lifeline. And I knew in that moment, I couldn't wait until the end of the night. If I stayed, I'd be cornered. If I waited, they would act. So I did the only thing I could do. I decided to leave. Quietly. Early. Without a single goodbye. I remember the moment vividly. The way the decision felt heavy and light all at once. Heavy because I knew I was walking away from my own children. Away from the illusion of family I had worked so hard to preserve. Light because for the first time that evening, I felt like I had some control. Like I wasn't standing helpless in the middle of their scheme. I slipped my hand into my granddaughter's for a brief second, giving it one last squeeze before letting go. She looked up at me with those wide, fearful eyes, silently asking if I was okay. I smiled down at her and nodded. That was all she needed. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough to understand that I was listening. And I was taking action. The first step was simple. I had to disappear from my own party without raising suspicion. I moved through the crowd slowly, deliberately. I made my way to the kitchen, pretending to check on the food. Then I drifted toward the hallway, as though I needed a moment to catch my breath. Each step was careful, measured. I couldn't let my children notice. The house was buzzing with life, guests chatting in the living room, cousins laughing near the dining table, neighbors balancing plates of food. It was easy to get lost in the noise, to let myself blend into the background. And that's exactly what I did. I grabbed my coat from the closet with hands that trembled slightly, the fabric brushing against my arm like a whisper of freedom. I reached for my purse. My purse, which held not only my wallet, but keys, documents, and things they would have loved to get their hands on. I clutched it tight, holding it close to my body as I slipped down the side hallway. The back door creaked softly when I opened it. My heart stopped for a second, convinced someone would hear. Someone would turn their head and call my name. But the music covered the sound. The laughter drowned it out. And just like that, I was outside. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and refreshing, like a slap of reality. For the first time all evening, I could breathe. I stepped out into the darkness, the distant hum of the party still echoing behind me. The porch light cast long shadows across the yard, and the gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked to my car. Each step felt like a rebellion, like a declaration. You will not take me by surprise. You will not take what's mine. I slipped into the driver's seat, shut the door softly, and started the engine. The hum of it filled the silence around me, a sound that felt almost victorious. And then, I drove away. Inside the house, the celebration carried on, at least for a while, but eventually they noticed. My son was the first to realize I was gone. I can picture it perfectly, the way his eyes darted around the room, scanning the crowd, his brow furrowing as he looked for me. He probably assumed I was in the kitchen or maybe upstairs. But then he checked, and I wasn't there. My daughter joined in, her smile fading as she whispered to him, trying to keep the concern hidden from the guests. I can almost hear their hushed voices, their questions. Where is she? Did you see her leave? Did anyone notice? Confusion turned to frustration as minutes passed. Guests began asking, "Where's the birthday girl?" And my children scrambled for excuses. They probably told people I had gone to rest, that I was tired, that I needed a moment of quiet. All lies. Because they knew, deep down, something was wrong. They hadn't planned for me to leave. Not like that. And the fact that I was gone meant one thing. They had lost control. Meanwhile, I was already on my way to the first step of my plan. I didn't go home. No, that would have been too obvious, too dangerous. If they realized I was missing, that would be the first place they'd check. Instead, I drove to the bank. The night manager knew me by name. I had been a customer there for decades. When I walked in, purse clutched tightly against me, his eyebrows rose in surprise. It wasn't every day that someone showed up at nearly closing time, dressed for a party, looking both calm and shaken at once. I told him I needed access to my safe deposit box immediately. My voice didn't waver. He didn't ask questions, just led me into the small, sterile room with its walls of locked boxes. Inside that little metal box was more than paper. It was security. Insurance policies, title deeds, passbooks, copies of my will. All the things my children were probably salivating over at that very moment. I pulled them out one by one, stacking them carefully into a folder I had tucked inside my purse. My hands no longer shook. My heartbeat slowed. For the first time all evening, I felt steady. Because I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting. I was taking back control. When I left the bank, I didn't drive back to the house. I didn't even drive back to my own home. I went straight to the one place I knew I would be safe. My lawyer's office. Of course, it was late and the building was dark, but I didn't need him there that night. I just needed to drop off what I had taken, slide the envelope into the secure drop box he kept for clients who needed to leave documents after hours. I pushed the folder in, heard the metallic clink as it slid into place, and let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. Everything important was safe now, out of their reach, untouchable. And with that, the first steps of my plan were complete. Back at the party, my children were probably still scrambling, still searching, still trying to figure out where I had gone and why. They were likely putting on smiles for the guests, pretending everything was fine while panic simmered beneath their skin. I could imagine the moment they realized I had taken my purse with me. The moment they whispered to each other, "She knows." But they didn't know everything. They didn't know that their own daughter, their child, was the one who had saved me. And they didn't know that I was no longer their victim. I had slipped away quietly, yes, but it was more than an escape. It was the beginning of something much bigger, the beginning of their downfall. I didn't go back that night. After leaving the party quietly, after securing my documents and making sure everything was safe, I chose not to return home right away. I spent the night at a friend's house, someone I trusted, someone outside the circle of family and suspicion. I needed time to breathe, time to think, time to let the reality of what had just happened settle into my bones. But as much as I wanted to hide away, I knew it couldn't last, because eventually my children would come looking for me. And they did. The next morning, my phone lit up with call after call. First my son, then my daughter, then both of them together, one after the other, over and over again. I didn't answer. Not yet. Their voicemails grew more frantic with each message. At first, they sounded worried, asking if I was okay, if something had happened. But by the 5th, the 6th, the 10th message, the worry turned sharp, accusatory, demanding. "Mom, where did you go? Why would you leave your own party? Mom, call me back right now. This is serious. You're acting ridiculous. We need to talk. Stop being dramatic and answer your phone." Their words stung, but they didn't surprise me. By the following afternoon, they showed up in person. I was sitting in the living room, a cup of tea resting on the table beside me, when the knock came. Hard, insistent. Not the polite tap of a neighbor dropping by, but the pounding of someone who felt entitled to walk in whether they were welcome or not. I knew it was them before I even opened the door. My son stood there, jaw tight, eyes flashing with a mix of anger and desperation. My daughter hovered just behind him, her lips pressed into a thin line, her voice sharp before I even said hello. "Where were you?" she demanded, brushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. My son followed, slamming the door behind him. "Mom, what is going on? You left your own party without a word. Do you know how embarrassing that was for us?" "For them. Not for me. For them." I sat back down in my chair, calm, collected, watching them pace around the room like animals caught in a trap. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush to explain. I just let the silence stretch between us. And that silence unnerved them more than any words could have. Finally, my daughter snapped. "We know what you're doing," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You're hiding things from us. You've been keeping secrets. Don't think we don't notice." My son leaned forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You've got money tucked away, don't you? Assets, accounts. Don't lie to us, Mom, we're not stupid. You've been planning to keep it all to yourself." There it was. The truth laid bare. The act was over. The fake sweetness, the smiles, the toasts. It had all crumbled. Now their real faces showed. Greed twisted their features, anger sharpened their voices. They weren't my children in that moment. They were vultures circling what they thought was their prey. And they wanted answers. "Why would you sneak out like that?" My daughter pressed, her voice rising. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how that looked?" Her words echoed in my ears, and for a brief second, I felt that pang of heartbreak again. Not because of their anger, but because their concern wasn't for me. It was never for me. It was for their image, their pride, their access to what I had. My son's voice cut through my thoughts. "Tell us the truth, Mom. Did you go to the bank? Did you move money? Did you talk to your lawyer?" His words struck me like arrows. He knew, or at least he suspected. I kept my face still. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just looked at him with calm, steady eyes. That silence drove him mad. "Don't play games with us," he shouted, slamming his fist against the table so hard the teacup rattled. "We've been patient, but enough is enough. You're old, Mom. You can't handle this by yourself. You need us. You can't just keep everything locked away and expect us to sit around like fools." I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. My silence wasn't weakness. It was power. And slowly, they were realizing it. Then from the doorway, a small voice spoke. "Grandma?" My granddaughter. She had been standing there, listening, her little hands clutched together nervously. Her parents whipped around, startled, their anger momentarily forgotten. My daughter rushed toward her. "Sweetheart, go upstairs. This is a grown-up conversation." But the little girl didn't move. She looked straight at me, then at her parents, and said in a trembling voice, "I told Grandma the truth. I told her what you said." The room went still. My daughter's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, grabbing her daughter's arm. "Don't say things like that." But the child pulled away. "You said you were going to take her money. You said it after the party. I heard you." Her honesty cut through the room like a blade. For a moment, my children were speechless. Then the lies poured out. "That's not true," my daughter stammered, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "She's making things up. She misunderstood." "Yeah," my son added quickly, his tone rough. "Kids hear things wrong all the time. You can't take her word seriously, Mom. She's just a child." But I knew better. I had seen the fear in my granddaughter's eyes that night. I had heard the urgency in her whisper. Children may confuse small things, but they don't invent betrayal. They don't spin lies this sharp. And in that moment, watching them scramble to cover their tracks, I felt my silence harden into something stronger. Something unshakable. Strength. I leaned forward slowly, folding my hands on the table, meeting their frantic eyes with calm determination. "You want the truth?" I said finally, my voice low, steady, deliberate. They froze, caught between fear and rage. "The truth," I continued, "is that you planned to betray me. The truth is that you thought I was blind, that I wouldn't notice your fake smiles, your empty compliments, your greedy eyes watching my every move. But you were wrong." My daughter's lip trembled. My son opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand and silenced him. "Because while you were plotting," I said, my voice gaining strength, "I was acting. While you were waiting for your chance to strike, I was protecting myself. Last night when I walked out of that party, I didn't just leave. I took everything with me. The documents, the accounts, the deeds, everything you thought you'd get your hands on. It's gone. Safe. Untouchable." The color drained from their faces. "You wanted to rob me of what I earned, what I built with my own 2 hands, what your father and I sacrificed our lives for," I went on. "But you will get nothing. Not now. Not ever. Because you don't deserve it." Silence stretched across the room, heavy and suffocating. My granddaughter's small voice broke it. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. I reached for her hand, pulling her close, wrapping her in my arms. "Don't you be sorry, darling," I said softly. "You told me the truth. And because of you, I was ready." I looked up at my children over her shoulder, my eyes cold, unwavering. "You should be ashamed. Not just for what you tried to do to me, but for what you taught your daughter, for the lies you told in this very room. You showed her greed when you should have shown her love. You showed her betrayal when you should have shown her loyalty." My son's shoulders sagged. My daughter's eyes filled with angry tears. They wanted to argue, to shout, to deny, but they couldn't. The truth was already out, and I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. My silence, my calm, my certainty, it was louder than any shout could ever be. That day, the confrontation ended not with their victory, but with mine. They left my house in silence, their plans shattered, their pride in ruins. My granddaughter stayed, holding my hand, her little voice whispering, "I love you, Grandma." And I knew, despite the heartbreak, despite the betrayal, that I had done the right thing, because I had taken back my power, and they would never see me as weak again. They stood in my living room like people who had been caught in the act of stealing a painting from a museum, frozen, guilty, unsure where to put their hands. Their faces said everything: anger, embarrassment, a dawning horror that the plan they'd whispered about and schemed over had fallen apart. I let them feel it. I let them sit in that stunned silence for a long moment, while the truth wrapped itself around the room like a slow, inevitable tide. "How did you—" my son began, but his voice broke halfway through the question. My daughter's eyes were wide and wet. She kept opening and closing her mouth like a fish, searching for an excuse that didn't exist. My granddaughter sat close to me on the couch, small and trembling, but proud in that honest, unpretentious way children are when they know they did right. It was time to explain. Not in a rush, not in anger, but deliberately, because revenge doesn't need to be loud to be lethal. Revenge is planned. Revenge is precise. Revenge, when done right, is educational. "You want to know how I secured my fortune before you could touch it?" I asked, my voice even, the kind of calm that can make nerves unravel. They nodded because they had to. They needed to hear it. Maybe they also wanted to hope I had been careless. Maybe they wanted the chance to trip me up again. Either way, I gave them the answer. "Months ago," I said, "before any of this party talk, I started fixing things. Not because I don't trust you. I tried to trust you, but because experience teaches you to be careful. I kept copies of every document. I updated my will. I moved accounts into joint protections that require more than one signature. I transferred titles. I spoke to my lawyer and my banker. I made sure my financial affairs were not something you could exploit with a sneaky conversation and a late-night plan." I watched the realization wash over them, like a slow hand dragging across frosted glass. I described the small, mundane-seeming steps I'd taken, because people don't suspect hope in the ordinary. I set alerts on accounts, so I got notification the moment any transaction was attempted. I put important documents into secure storage, not in a drawer where anyone could borrow them. I set up a trust for my granddaughter, so that her inheritance is managed by an independent trustee and cannot be accessed on a whim. I updated beneficiary designations so everything is clear, and not at the mercy of manipulation. I scheduled meetings with my attorney to iron out contingencies, powers of attorney, banking protocols, and legal safeguards. I even transferred certain assets into my name and designated them as non-transferable. Simple paperwork, but effective. I could see the panic creep up in their eyes. The math they'd done in their heads, the fantasies of quick transfers, of midnight signings, of coaxing and coercing, collapsed. They had planned for a chaotic, opportunistic robbery, a late-night hustle when I was tired and distracted. They had not planned for a thoughtful, preemptive defense. "You thought you had time," I said softly. "You thought I would be easy to pressure, but protection doesn't come from hiding. It comes from thinking ahead. I thought about what you might do, and I closed those doors." My daughter's face crumpled. "Mom, she started, like a child trying to apologize for breaking a vase, then caught herself. The adult instincts, shame, pride, fear, wrestled on her features. My son, angry and wounded, tried to bluff. "You went behind our backs. You should have told us. We would never." He stopped, because he knew how flimsy that lie was. He could feel his own complicity in the words he'd spoken to their child, the plans they had whispered in private. I looked at them both, neither pleading nor triumphant. I simply stated the thing that cut deepest. You taught her something different, and I won't let you teach her that greed is a way of life. That was the heart of it. Securing my fortune wasn't only about money, it was about setting an example. I had raised them, and now I raised a different standard for my granddaughter. If my children had learned that bending and scheming were acceptable to get ahead, then I had a responsibility to show a child another path. Foresight, integrity, protection. Then I moved on to the practicalities, because legal shields are invisible until you detail them. I changed my accounts so they require dual controls, I said. Large disbursements need verification. Transfers above certain limits trigger holds. The house title is held in a trust that names a professional trustee with fiduciary duties. I set aside a clear legacy for my granddaughter that is not accessible to parents until she reaches an age and a legal status that protects her. I also made sure that any gifts or loans are documented and transparent. That way, no one can say one thing and do another. The stunned looks did not soften. If anything, they hardened, as the reality of their loss, not just of what they might have taken, but of the ease of taking it, took root. And I had another safeguard, I continued. I had witnesses, people who can attest to my intentions, lawyers, bankers, neighbors. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I knew how persuasive people can be when they bend the truth. You made it clear that you would lie and manipulate when it suited you. The world isn't built on good intentions alone. It's built on proof. So I made sure there was proof. My granddaughter looked up at me then, eyes shining with an odd mixture of pride and anxiety. She was the reason I'd gone to such lengths. She was the living proof that love can be protective as well as permissive. You did all this for me? She asked in a small voice. For you and for me, I told her. For the life we both deserve. You will not inherit the mistakes of your parents. You will not be punished for their choices. I will make sure of that. They reacted as people always do when faced with a moral mirror. My daughter tried to explain, to soften the edges. She talked about bills, pressures, getting by. She painted a picture of a life cramped by expenses, of resentments that had boiled under the surface. She spoke of plans they'd made to help me, plans that had turned unscrupulous in their execution. I listened, but I did not accept that hardship justifies theft. There's a line between need and harming someone who entrusted you. Crossing that line is a choice. Their pressures are real, I said calmly, but desperation doesn't excuse betrayal. If you were struggling, you could have asked. You could have tried honestly. Instead, you chose to plan in secret, to manipulate a small child into being complicit, to put her in the middle of a moral crime. That is something I refuse to normalize. My voice was steady, but my words were sharp. I wanted them to understand not only that their attempts had failed, but that their breach would have consequences beyond money. Trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. Family, once used as a ladder instead of a shelter, becomes hollow. There were practical punishments as well, though I did not see vengeance in them. I saw education and long-term protection. I began by reassigning some responsibilities I'd previously entrusted to them. From now on, I told them, all financial decisions will be routed through professionals. We will have transparent accounting. You will not be in positions that allow unchecked access to anything that affects my granddaughter's future. That stung. They bristled at the idea of not being in control, of being watched, of accounting for their words and actions. But the truth is, accountability is the antidote to secrecy. I wanted to make sure the message landed. Greed has consequences. Not just legal, not just financial, but moral and relational. Their choices would shape the family dynamic for years. If they wanted reconciliation, they would need to show steady change. Not a midnight conversation or a few sweet words at brunch, but real, documented effort. And then I told them what many of them did not expect. I distanced myself, but not permanently. I offered a path back. "If you want to be in her life honestly," I said, nodding toward my granddaughter, "you will earn it. You will take steps to fix what you broke. You will go to counseling. You will make amends. But you will not be allowed to weaponize your relationship with her. You will not be allowed to teach her that family is a marketplace." Their expressions shifted. My daughter started to cry. Not the performative kind they had used earlier, but a falling apart sound that hinted at real regret. My son's jaw worked as if he were chewing on his pride and trying to swallow it. Then came the final, most satisfying part of the plan: empowerment for the person who mattered most. "I set up an education fund and a trust for her," I said, turning to my granddaughter. "She will have access to resources for schooling, for experiences, and for a start in life that won't depend on the whims of others. That trust is managed by someone impartial. If she needs something, she will have it, but she will not be used." She leaned against me, little shoulders shaking, and I held her like a treasure. In that embrace, I felt every sleepless night, every struggle, every triumph and sacrifice that had led me here. All of it funneled into protecting that small life. "As for you," I told my children, voice quiet but hard as a coin, "you robbed me of trust, but you did not rob her of a future. You can watch that future be built without your interference, or you can work to be part of it with dignity. The choice is yours." They muttered something about needing time, about wanting to understand, about anger that felt like blame. But the structure was in place. The bank notifications, the trust paperwork, the lawyer's letters. All of it removed the possibility of a sudden, secretive grab. I had converted their plan into a lesson. I also made a move that some might call cruel, but which to me felt necessary. I limited access. Not out of spite, but out of safety. I made clear rules about visits and supervision, and I set boundaries they could not overstep without consequence. Love with boundaries is not lesser love, it's responsible love. For days after, they bounced between contrition and defiance. They tried to charm neighbors, to enlist sympathetic relatives, to paint me as stubborn and paranoid. But the documents were unambiguous. The trust was binding. The alerts were active. The bank manager had my copy of instructions. My lawyer had notarized affidavits. And my granddaughter's name was already secured in ways that would make it impossible for a midnight scheme to succeed. Oh, they tried their performances. Late-night apologies, flowers left at the door, "I'm sorry" texts that vanished by morning. But promises made under duress and then repealed with convenience do not rebuild trust. Healing would require time and consistent action. Not drama, not theatrics, real work. In the quiet that followed the storm, I did something else. I started telling the story, not to shame, but to teach. I told neighbors, close friends, and people I trusted what had happened, because secrecy breeds repetition. I explained why I had done what I did, and why I wouldn't tolerate being treated like an ATM by the people who had once leaned on me for everything. My story became a boundary marker for the family, a sign that manipulation would not be ignored. And as the weeks stretched on, something unexpected began to happen. My granddaughter grew more secure, less anxious. She laughed more freely, knowing her safety net was real. She asked curious questions about trusts and banks like a child learning a secret language. She started to understand that protection isn't the same as fear. It's a way of loving someone enough to make smart decisions for them. For my children, the consequences were harsher. They lost access to the easy route. They had to step into accountability. They had to confront their motives, their finances, their patterns. Some days they responded with anger. Other days with real halting effort. Time would tell whether this would be a pivot or a punishment. But the most important thing was simple and pure. My granddaughter was safe. And that was worth every difficult conversation, every awkward family dinner, every raised eyebrow among neighbors. You protect the vulnerable. You do not let the world teach a child that family means taking what's not yours. People sometimes equate revenge with cruelty. They think revenge must be dramatic, vindictive, loud. My revenge was different. It was thoughtful. It was legal. It was loyal, not to money but to values. I transformed betrayal into empowerment. I turned greed into education. I didn't ruin lives for the thrill of it. I closed doors to protect the next generation. They left the house that day chastened and constrained. They lost the easy path to fortune. More importantly, they were forced to look at themselves in a new mirror, the one that shows not what you say when congratulated at a party, but what you do when no one is watching. When the dust settled, neighbors would say how composed I'd been. Friends would tell me how brave they thought I was. But what mattered most was the quiet morning I sat with my granddaughter, sharing pancakes, telling her how proud I was of her honesty. She smiled up at me, butter on her lip, and mumbled, "I didn't want you to lose your money, Grandma." You cannot put a price on that. Not on the truth in a child's voice. Not on the knowledge that you protected someone who truly needed you. Greed had knocked on my door. I answered, not with matching greed or anger, but with preparation, with boundaries, and with love so clear and firm that it could not be bent. And in the end, that is the real revenge. Not to crush, but to fortify. Not to humiliate, but to educate. Not to win a battle of wills, but to secure the future of the innocent. They learned it the hard way. My granddaughter learned it in the best possible way. Safe, loved, and never again a pawn in adult games. That was my victory. That was my shocking revenge. When I look back on everything, it isn't the money that weighs on me. It isn't the legal documents or the banks or even the arguments that cut so deeply. What lingers is the ache in a mother's heart, the realization that my own children, the ones I raised, the ones I sacrificed for, would plot against me. That betrayal is a wound that heals slowly, if it ever heals at all. But in the middle of all that heartbreak, there was a light. My granddaughter, just a child, had the courage to tell me the truth when no one else would. Her honesty, her innocence, her love, that became my strength. It reminded me that loyalty still exists, that love can come from the smallest voices, and that trust, once broken, can still find new roots in the next generation. Family should be built on love, not greed, on protection, not betrayal. I may have lost something in my children that night, but I gained something stronger in my granddaughter. The proof that goodness can survive, even when surrounded by shadows. And in the end, I learned something I'll never forget. Sometimes, silence is the loudest revenge.